One user's $90 Kimi Code subscription ran dry in 4 days. Qwen3 Coder on OpenRouter runs 0.22 per million input tokens, which is about 4 times cheaper. So at any real coding volume, that price gap hits your wallet fast. Both tools are pushing hard right now, so I'm running Qwen3 Coder against Kimi Code across 5 head-to-head tests to see who actually wins. The cost gap is brutal, but there's a deployment test coming up that could shift the whole calculation for teams who need vision input or a lockdown API. My name is Brian, and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. And every number here traces back to official pricing pages, model cards, or artificial analysis's independent benchmarks. If you're running a coding agent that fires thousands of API calls a week, picking the wrong tool costs real money every single day. Test 1. Cost. A developer I know signed up for Kimi Code's $99 Allegro plan on a Monday, ran it through a multi-file refactor and some agentic loops, and by Thursday, the credits were gone. And that's not a fringe case. At scale, subscription burn is a real budget killer, and it's exactly what this test is measuring. I looked at the actual published numbers on both sides. Qwen3 Coder via OpenRouter comes in at 0.22 per million input tokens and 1 toit in 80 out, community reported, so bear that in mind. Kimi Code K2.7 is 0.95 in and 4.0 out, straight from the vendor, which works out to roughly 4 times more expensive on input and about 2.2 times more on output. And Qwen's Apache 2.0 license means you can self-host and basically zero out the marginal cost entirely. I was expecting Kimi's subscription tiers to look reasonable once you spread the cost out, but the data said otherwise. One user drained 99 quarters in 4 days. Qwen3 Coder takes cost, and it's not close. Pay per token, self-host if you want, and you never hit a wall, which puts Qwen3 Coder up 1-0. Test 2. Coding benchmark performance. A fair objection you've probably already typed in the comments. Sure, Qwen is cheap, but does it actually write good code? A model that hallucinates APIs or breaks on a 500-line refactor costs you more in debugging time than you ever saved on tokens. So let's look at what the benchmark numbers actually say. What surprised me here is how close the community verified numbers are. On the 16x eval clean markdown test, both models tie at 9.25 out of 10. Same score, same test setup. Kimi K2.7 also posts a 62.E on its own Kimi Code bench v2 and an 81.2 on MCP mark verified. But those are vendor published and not independently verified, so I take them with a grain of salt. The caveat is that Kimi's proprietary benchmarks have no Qwen comparison point. They're measuring completely different things. And the one test where both showed up independently, they tied dead even. So Kimi's vendor numbers look good on paper. But the only apples to apples data we have says these two are matched on code quality right now. I went in thinking the cheap open weight model would fall behind on benchmarks, but Kimi's edge here rests almost entirely on self-reported numbers. Still, those vendor claims are the only directional signal we have on agentic coding, so Kimi Code takes coding benchmark performance, and the score is tied now, 1 each. Test 3, speed. So 64 tokens per second sounds fine until you're waiting on a 2,000 token code review inside an agentic loop that fires 30 times in a row. That's a multi-minute wait per run. And if you're iterating on a deadline, that latency compounds across your whole session. Speed is a real productivity cost, and it adds up fast. I looked at what artificial analysis actually measured. Qwen3 Coder sits at 64.3 tokens per second, which ranks it 7th out of 44 models, independently verified and pretty solid. Kimi's base speed is reported at around 100 tokens per second by the community, not officially measured, and Kimi's high-speed tier claims 180 tokens per second, up to 260 in short context. But that's straight from the vendor with no independent check. Qwen's 64.3 TOCAS is real and verified, and it's actually a respectable number, but Kimi's high-speed tier, even if you discount the vendor claim a bit, is pointing toward nearly 3 times that throughput. So Kimi Code takes speed on the directional evidence, and that puts Kimi Code ahead, 2-1. Alright, So Kimi Code is ahead on speed and benchmarks. Qwen3 Coder is way ahead on cost. But we still have context limits and deployment coming up. And the deployment test in particular is where the open source licensing story either saves you or doesn't. And that one could completely change how you think about the cost math we just ran. Test 4. Context and output limits. A solo dev shipping a large monorepo refactor on a Friday night needs to know, will the model actually hold the whole codebase in context? Or will it start forgetting files halfway through and introduce silent bugs? At 262,000 tokens, you can fit a lot of code, but the ceiling matters when the project grows. What I found here is pretty clean. Both Qwen3 Coder and Kimi Code K2.7 sit at exactly 262,144 tokens natively. Qwen's figure comes from OpenRouter and artificial analysis. Kimi's from vendor spec. Both can also reach 1 million tokens. Qwen through Yarn extension, Kimi via the K3 model. And I couldn't find published max output token limits for either product, so that part stays open. The honest caveat is that they reach 1 million tokens through different mechanisms. IRN extension for Qwen versus a full model upgrade to K3 for Kimi, which is a pretty different thing under the hood. But at the K2.7 level that most people are actually pricing and testing right now, the native context window is identical, and that's the number that matters for today's decision. Context is a dead tie. Both land at 262K natively. Both stretch to 1 million. So the scoreboard stays Kimi Code 2, Qwen3 Coder 1 with 1 tied. Test 5. Deployment and modality. The number that matters here is 0, as in $0 in marginal API cost if you can self-host. And if you're on a team with a compliance requirement or a tight per token budget, the license and hosting story is the whole ballgame. And the two models land in completely different places on this one. Qwen3 Coder is Apache 2.0, full stop. You can pull the weights, run it on your own hardware, and pay near zero marginal cost at scale. Kimi Code K2.7 is modified MIT, which sounds open, but it's API only with no self-hosting. And Kimi does win on modality though. It supports image and video input via MoonVIT, which Qwen doesn't have at all, so the deployment picture really splits here depending on what you actually need. The modified MIT label on Kimi sounds useful until you realize you still can't self-host the agent. So Qwen3 Coder takes deployment on the OpenWeight license and the ability to run it yourself, and that brings the score to Qwen3 Coder 2, Kimi Code 2, with 1 tied. Qwen3 Coder wins on cost, roughly 4 times cheaper on input, and 2.2 times cheaper on output per token, and it wins on deployment because Apache 2.0 means you can self-host and cut marginal API costs to basically nothing, so there's no subscription to drain, and your $99 doesn't disappear in 4 days like it did for that Kimi user. Kimi Code wins on vendor-published benchmark performance. Kimi Code Bench V2 at 62.0 and MCP Mark Verified at 81.2 show a strong agentic coding story, even if those are self-reported. It wins on speed, with a high-speed tier claiming 180 tokens per second, versus Qwen's measured 64.3. And it's the only one here with vision input, image, and video via MoonVIT, which Qwen flat out doesn't have. Going in, I thought Kimi's speed and benchmark numbers would pull it ahead cleanly, but the cost gap is just too wide to ignore, and 0.22 versus 0.95 per million input tokens is the number that sticks. For most people paying out of pocket, Qwen3 Coder is the pick. Open weights, Apache 2.0, no subscription burn, and go Kimi Code only if you need that high-speed tier throughput or you're passing screenshots and video into your coding agent. If you want to see how Kimi Code stacks up against a paid tool on pure price, I ran that exact comparison in Kimi Code versus Cursor, which is cheaper. And the numbers there are pretty wild too, so worth watching before you commit to any subscription.